On November 5, 2020, a gang member was murdered in the Bronx, and by the time the police came for the arrest, somebody inside the NYPD had already warned the killer, and he had already escaped into the Dominican Republic. Now that raised the question, who inside the NYPD had tipped him off? Man, the truth was even worse, because the officer leaking info wasn't only corrupt, she was also secretly dating the gang leader that they was trying to arrest. Now the murder that triggered this whole thing was just cruel. Angel Barrero, a former associate and Trinitario rapper, had been sitting in his car in Mount Eden when a man walked up and opened fire. The death marked the peak of Horizon War and forced everybody to confront the terrible realization that a cop had been feeding him information. Now, to understand why this shooting happened in the first place, you gotta go back some 30-odd years to the origins of the gang inside of Rikers Island. By the late 1990s, the Trinitarios were established. Sets formed under different leaders, each controlling its own territory. In Brooklyn, Alberto Santana, known as Flaco Vino, took charge of the Sunset Trinitarios. Now he declared himself La Suprema and directly challenged the chain of command. Around 2010 and 2011, he pushed into the Bronx without the approval of local leaders. When he saw the talking wasn't working, he chose violence, and members across boroughs were forced to choose sides. Now, Caballo didn't like the tight control in the Sunset Trinitarios. He felt boxed in by strict orders and a lack of discussion. By 2017, he began quietly organizing with trusted friends to break away and create a brand new crew. Here's the thing though, speaking against leadership carried a serious risk, but Caballo, he pressed on. In 2018, he formed the Shooting Boys, or SB. Overnight, allies became enemies and territorial arguments and gang wars started. SB claimed areas near Caesar Place and Davidson Park in the West Bronx. Now these blocks bordered Sunset Trinitario territory, guaranteeing constant tension. SB needed a reputation for strength because they had very few allies. Now some of their main guys had ties to the local rap scene, which boosted visibility, but street influence depended on action and follow-through. Disputes increased quickly. In June 2019, Caballo and another SB member confronted a man on the street who they believed was connected to rival crews. Now words turned into guns being drawn. The man survived, but the message spread that SB would react quickly to disrespect. Now 2 weeks later, another shooting near 182nd Street in Grand Concourse made the rivalry public. Shots was fired in the middle of the street. The man survived, but the incident sent a clear message throughout the neighborhood. The Shooting Boys wasn't afraid to pull a weapon over every minor dispute. Now word spread pretty quickly through the Bronx streets and through social media circles connected to the local rap scene. By the summer of 2020, Caballo and his crew began looking outside the Bronx for opportunities. In July 2020, he and Moises Goya organized a robbery in New Jersey. According to investigators, they traveled out of state specifically to avoid attention from rivals and local police who already knew their names. The robbery took place behind a gas station late at night. The two men waited for their target to arrive, then approached them with guns. Within seconds, they forced the victim to hand over property before quickly leaving the area and returning to the Bronx. The crime showed something important about the Shooting Boys. Even though they were a relatively new crew, they was willing to travel and take risks to bring in money. On July 31st, 2020, Goya targeted the Trinitarios again near 182nd Street. Now nobody got hit, but the repeated attacks made it clear that the Shooting Boys wasn't going to back down. The neighborhood felt the tension. Residents and rival crews could sense the violence was coming. Now the NYPD, they responded by increasing patrols and sending specialized peace and safety units into the area. Officers attempted to reduce tensions by monitoring known gang locations and stopping suspicious activity. But enforcement alone couldn't stop the conflict from building. Officer Gina Mestra, working in the 52nd Precinct that covered SB territory, had a long history of complaints and lawsuits that had already cost the city over $1 million. Now, instead of keeping distance and enforcing the law, investigators later found out that she and Caballo started communicating secretly in 2020 through private social media accounts and phone numbers. Over time, the relationship became romantic. Some SB members doubted her intentions, but Caballo trusted her completely. Over the next few months, she sent him sensitive information about police plans, raids, and ongoing investigations. These warnings let him and his crew move carefully and avoid risks that could have trapped other gang leaders. SB operated with an advantage that no street gang should have had. Everything came to a head on November 4, 2020. Earlier that day, rival members shot an SB near Davidson Park, injuring 2 people who survived. Caballo wanted retaliation. The next morning, he tracked down Angel Barrero, aka Jay La Sombra, a former associate and Trinitario rapper who was driving a black Acura. Caballo approached the car and fired through the passenger window, then the driver's side. Barrero died instantly. The killing shocked the Bronx. It showed that SB had crossed the line and made the gang war even more dangerous for anybody involved. Rival crews, SB members, and law enforcement alike. Immediately after the murder, Detective Maestra secretly sent Caballo surveillance footage showing him at the scene. She warned him that investigators would soon identify him and told him to leave the country. And that same night, he booked a flight to the Dominican Republic. By the next morning, when the NYPD executed warrants, the man had vanished. His escape left authorities scrambling and fueled rumors on the streets and in the media, increasing the urgency around SB's actions. Now, even when he was in exile, his crew continued to operate. In June 2021, members spotted an op at a nightclub on West 207th Street wearing an expensive watch. They followed him as he left around 4:40 a.m. Gunfire erupted when their op tried to drive away. The man was killed and the watch was stolen. The murder showed that SB could carry out violent acts even with their leader gone, and it proved how bold the group had become. Investigators didn't immediately connect the crew to the crime, but the pattern of violence was clear. By March 2022, federal authorities had enough evidence to act. 10 SB members were indicted on racketeering, murder, and related charges. 9 were arrested quickly. Caballo stayed abroad until U.S. Marshals found him in April 2022 and returned him to New York. In November 2022, he pleaded guilty to the murder of Angel Barrero and was sentenced to 35 years to life in prison. The combination of violent acts, loyal members, and a compromised police officer finally brought the full force of the law down on the crew. Investigators focused on Maestra's role. A phone warrant revealed extensive communications with Caballo. She shared investigative details, grand jury proceedings, and witness names. Prosecutors revealed a witness who was beaten after information was leaked. She also sent surveillance footage from the Barrero murder and advised him on timing his departure from the States. She was charged with serious federal crimes, including violent offenses, planning to block justice, conspiracy to interfere with an official proceeding, and helping after the fact. Each charge carried the possibility of a long prison sentence. She pleaded not guilty and was released on bond. Her actions broke public trust and put a lot of lives in danger. By April 2023, the remaining Shooting Boys members connected to Milton Grant's murder were arrested. Authorities used surveillance footage, phone records, and other evidence to build the case. Now, their sentences were very similar to Caballo's. The Shooting Boys, once powerful and visible in the West Bronx, was completely taken apart.